Another rumor that was going around was that you'd be able to have filter layers in Photoshop 8. Well, of course, this is Photoshop CS, and it doesn't have filtered layers, but it has something that's pretty darn cool. So don't be surprised if you go to a filter you've used many times before. For example, I use Texturizer every now and then, and I go to this filter expecting to see that good old little dialog box, and all of a sudden I get this gigantic dialog box that takes over my whole monitor. Yours probably might look something like this when you first open it up, where it has the preview on the side and then a list of available filters including various previews. I'm going to just look at my overall image and also make sure I'm looking at 100% size so I can really get a good idea of how this filter is working. So to begin with, it looks and acts very similar to the previous filters in that I can play around with my settings and get a preview. But where it starts to get interesting is you have the ability to change your mind and say, actually, maybe I'll use this filter instead. So on the fly, we're changing to different filters and previewing instead of having to cancel and then go to a new filter. That looks kind of interesting. Let's make it a little less intense, perhaps. Something like that, or maybe this way. Yeah, I like that. But what's also interesting is I can use this button down the bottom to add on top of this. So at first it's duplicated the same layer, but now I can go back, for example, to Texturizer. So now we have Texturizer on top of watercolor. I can change the order of them. Now it's not exactly like layers because I cannot change things like opacity and so on, but I certainly can change which layers are visible and in what layers of these filters appear. And you can put multiples on top. Let's do one more and use this one. And in a typical example, we'll find no matter where we put it, it really doesn't look all that great, so we can just delete it and say, you know what, I didn't really like that after all. Click OK, and you'll notice a very important thing. It is not a separate layer, so this is still a one-shot deal like any other filter. If you didn't like it, you'd have to undo it and then go back and choose some other filter, or go directly to the filter gallery where you can start building from scratch and say, okay, first I want to use this filter, and so on. So it's quite different than our previous way of using filters. Not all filters show up in this, just sort of the artistic type filters that you've used. So filters like motion blur and so on do not apply here. But it's a really interesting way to experiment with multiple filters and very quickly see what kind of results you're going to get.